Mr Watson, a member of the public who's going to be taking part in proceedings, but also Cabinet colleagues and officers this evening. And I think the last time I checked, the 5 Hackney residents that were already watching us this evening. The clerk of the meeting, Mr Spagg, has already read out our protocols, but just to reiterate that the feed you'll be seeing is the last person that was speaking or the current person that is speaking. I'm not going to do a long set of introductions, but obviously since our last meeting in July, there's been a great deal of activity. At that meeting, we obviously provided an update on our corporate plan and also reflected on the impact that coronavirus was having on our community. I think then, as I have done in Cabinet meetings since April, we were under no illusions that the pandemic remains one of the biggest challenges the borough has ever faced. But it has also seen, whether it's within the council, wider public services, the NHS, or indeed the community, a huge amount of Hackney spirit that has seen us through to this stage. At all points, we've reiterated our support for life and limb in the local NHS, that wider support for our communities, our wish to see that as we move into the next phases of this crisis, that we rebuild a fairer and more equal Hackney, as well as ensuring that sustainability is built into any recovery. I'm under no illusion the crisis is far from over. I think I've reiterated that at every Cabinet meeting and full council. We continue to mourn those that we have lost. Blissfully, we haven't seen any recent deaths in Hackney, but that is no doubt likely to come given the rates of infection that we're seeing, not just in Hackney, but across the capital. I will reiterate the messages that we have put out through all channels, I think, about how to keep Hackney safe, and that is washing your hands, wearing a mask and watching your distance. But we've also been doing practical things to improve our local response, lobbying and campaigning for a better test and trace system, and also ensuring that we had the right level of testing and support around that in Hackney, and especially in those areas in the north of the borough where there have been clusterings of cases. We delivered over 17,000 leaflets to households there, ensured that there was a mobile testing unit in Stamford Hill, and I'm pleased that that testing unit is now much closer to the higher capacity that we saw at an earlier stage in the crisis, and did over 500 tests over the course of the weekend. You'll recall one of the key actions that we've been pushing for from across the council is a greater role for local government and our public health teams in responding to this crisis. We couldn't have done the work that we have done in Stamford Hill without the strong support from our public health team, the policy and strategy team, the voluntary sector team, communications, customer service, our digital teams and emergency planning. They've all worked with other parts of the council to ensure that we have the very best response. And finally, last week, we have started the work of local contact tracing, making sure that those people that haven't been successfully contacted by NHS Test and Trace are contacted by a team that we've built here in Hackney, and ensuring that all of those that are in the NHS Test and Trace system have the offer of humanitarian support at a local level. And as of yesterday, will also be offered that additional support to isolate if they need it. We continue to think that the system would be better with a greater role for local government, both in testing and tracing. And that's something that I know our 2 MPs share, and I thank Councillor Kennedy for his advocacy on that, as well as senior officers who, in their own professional disciplines, I think, continue to make that case to government and Public Health England, and frankly, anyone else that will listen and engage with us. I'm not going to talk about the challenges that we faced with testing a couple of weeks ago, but I really do hope that we've turned a corner. And I do welcome the fact that although the presence of London on the watch list from last Friday obviously will raise concerns for residents, and I hope focus minds on how we all respond to the crisis, that combined with the rollout of the app does offer us opportunities to improve our response, and one of those improvements is seeing testing capacity come back to the borough, as I referenced in Stamford Hill. I will finish and reminding people that one of the biggest routes for transmission in Hackney and in London remains household transmission. And while it is really important, as I said at the start, to keep Hackney safe, to wash your hands, wear a mask and watch your distance, recognising the challenges and frankly dangers of household mixing is really, really important if we're to avoid further restrictions and a movement towards a second national lockdown. But that, I think, is the critical message. That's where we stand at the moment, and we need to ensure that residents also watch out for the latest advice from government and the council in the days and weeks ahead. I will now move into the formal part of the agenda. As has been said, this is a meeting held in public. All decisions will be uploaded to the website, and both in terms of citizens participating and the press that has been made available to them. And obviously Mr Watson contacted Government Services and wished to take part. In terms of apologies for absence, I've had them from Deputy Mayor Renison. Have we had any other apologies for absence or lateness? Councillor Kennedy.
From Councillor Moema for absence.
Thank you. We will note that. I haven't been notified of any urgent items of business. In terms of declarations of interest, I would only highlight, and they're on my declarations of interest, that I'm a member of both CERA and Labour Cycles, but I don't think that has any impact on the later agenda items. It is common knowledge that I walk, cycle and take public transport, as I'm sure many of us do. I've not been noted of any intention to conduct the business in private or any representations to do so. In terms of questions, deputations and petitions, Mr Watson is obviously here. He's a resident of Victoria Ward and would like to speak. Given it is, as I understand it, about transport matters and related to some of the road closures, I'm going to take his contribution when we come to the emergency transport item, which will mean, Mr Watson, you're here for slightly longer potentially, but I think it's more relevant alongside that item than a standalone item, if that is okay. Moving on to the unrestricted minutes of the Cabinet Procurement Committee. I wasn't there and our chair in Deputy Mayor Renison isn't here, so can I ask another member of the committee to just move that item, and are we happy to note the minutes?
I'm happy to do that.
Happy to do that.
Okay, noted.
Noted.
Thank you. Are we happy with the minutes from the 20th of July 2020?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you all. In Deputy Mayor Renison's absence, I'm going to introduce item 8, which is our overall financial position statement, as we have done since our first online an emergency cabinet meeting in April. We've been providing a regular update as part of the OFP on the financial position of the council, and this is no different. I would highlight in Deputy Mayor Renison's introduction to the report that we were forecasting an overspend on the general fund, excluding housing costs, of £64.4 million before the application of the government's emergency funding, which we've received so far of £2.14 million. Of this, the £60.8 million relates to additional expenditure and reduced income incurred on the general fund. The non-general fund overspend is £3.6 million. I think it firmly illustrates how important the government meeting the commitments they made to us when they said spend whatever it takes to respond to this crisis. But it also underlies, I think, and I pay tribute to Ian Williams and his team and all parts of the council, that our sound financial management coming into this crisis gives us a degree of resilience that other parts of local government don't always have. But it's still a stark set of challenges that we face, and we're about to submit our income related shortfall to MHCLG around fees and charges and lost income, and that goes in at the end of this month, and we do rely on that additional income that hopefully will bring, and it still represents a £9.4 million shortfall this year that we will have to close that gap, and puts a firm pressure. We obviously, there's a degree of uncertainty. The budget's been postponed. We're unclear whether there'll be that comprehensive spending review or what type of settlement we will get going into the autumn. But it's absolutely clear that we still need the government to respond to these shortfalls and, crucially, that loss of income that we highlight in the report. It's also worth highlighting that there is, in reflecting the government's decision, they're only partly funding our council tax and business rates losses, that we'll still have to make good that position in future years. We have, as all of you know, faced a decade of austerity, several years now of financial uncertainty, and we go into next year with that uncertainty still in the future, and future RFPs and obviously the budget making process for next year will be crucial in terms of how we respond in terms of next steps. And I make it clear, as I always do, to ensure that government listens to the calls from local government and properly funds us in the futures funding settlement, and that it's fair and transparent and in advance of our own budget making process, which is obviously already underway for next year. Did anyone else want to comment on the report? No? Are we happy to note the report? Agree the report?
Noted.
Thank you.
Noted.
Capital update is in my name.
Sorry, noted as well. I'm struggling to get to my mic. Noted.
Not at all, Councillor Williams. The Cabinet Report, item 9, capital update, in my name, is a more positive report. I suppose it's the yin to the RFP's yang. It does illustrate that we're continuing to invest in the long-term future of the borough. We're only able to do that because of that strong financial management, but also the political commitments that we've made in our manifesto and that are taken across to the corporate plan. And in this report, we continue our investment in our parks and green spaces. Many of us know Daubney Fields and the investment that happened there last summer around the new playground. I understand that it's further investment to come around the skate park there, but also redesigning the entrances to make that park more welcoming and permeable to local residents. Last time we met, we were leading into the full council meeting where Councillor Burke provided an update on our response to the climate emergency motion. Over the summer, we've seen the installation of new solar panels on the roof of the West Reservoir Centre, and a very captivating film made by Councillor Burke. Tonight, we're continuing that investment in solar panels on the roofs of 9 council-owned community and leisure buildings. Just those installation alone will reduce our energy costs as a council by 10 to 15%, as well as crucially saving 389 tonnes of carbon emissions. We also see investment in our estate lighting. We've long had a commitment and a rollout of LED bulbs on our streets, but we're extending that onto our estates, which in turn will see a reduction in energy consumption, more reliability, reduction in carbon emissions, and hopefully, crucially, more efficient services for our tenants and leaseholders. We are also making the investment this evening in the infrastructure that will underpin fortnightly collections and improving our recycling rate from next year. And ensuring that we are investing in feasibility studies around rebuilding a fairer economy in both Dalston and Hackney Central, enabling us to unlock some of our sites around the objectives of that more inclusive economy, and also making good the commitments we've already made in the Dalston conversation and the conversations we will continue with Hackney Central residents in the coming months. Are there any questions or contributions from colleagues? I'm not seeing any. I'd like to thank all my Cabinet colleagues, obviously, that are leading on these programmes that are pulled together in the capital update, and look forward to seeing these projects through to fruition. Can we agree the recommendations?
Agrees.
Agreed.
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 Thank you. So item 10 is the emergency transport strategy. Before I get Councillor Burke to introduce the report, I'll invite Mr. Watson to make his contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can people hear me?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Watson. I'm a Victoria Park, Victoria Ward resident. I declare I am a driver, but I'm also a very keen walker and cyclist as well. I don't know whether you remember, but I previously attended the June Cabinet meeting to express my concern over the experimental traffic order relating to, particularly to London Fields. And I think my fears seem to be well founded. And I'm sure you're all aware of the congestion, gridlock, and idling engines polluting the air that are being experienced daily on the roads of Hackney, such as Graham Road, Mare Street, Wells Street, as a result of the ETP. And that there is, from some parties, outrage of the scheme, and from many Hackney residents. And it's interesting, a useful barometer, if you don't see it really, is a website called Nextdoor Victoria Park. And there's lots of discussion about the schemes on there. But putting that aside, what I want to raise and bring to the attention of the Cabinet this evening is the impact that the overall emergency transport strategy and the EPOs are having to Hackney communities, and how it threatens the ability to deliver vital services to vulnerable residents during the resurgence of the pandemic now and in the future. I believe you may know about the great work of the charity Children with Voices Community Food Hub, who work with the Food Alliance Network operating in the areas of Hackney. I'm one of the volunteers, and along with many others, we collect food from donors all over London. We bag it and deliver it to Hackney hostels and vulnerable residents, many of whom are suffering financial stress due to furlough and loss of jobs as a result of the pandemic. Now, since the EPO introductions, it's become increasingly difficult and stressful to operate in this environment. We do have many cycling and walking volunteers. We cannot avoid using motor vehicles to do longer distance pickups from other parts of London and drop-offs in our borough. And we have reached a point where volunteers are no longer willing to risk parking tickets as they stop to climb stairs to deliver the much needed food parcels, and fines for unwittingly straying into restricted areas and taking turns into roads that seem to become more restricted by the week. I myself was ticketed as I dropped off a delivery, but I successfully appealed after proving my credentials as a bona fide volunteer. But I was surprised that in the letter from Parking Services, they wrote, "As a volunteer key worker, your vehicle should have been registered on the Hackney exemption list." And then in the next paragraph, only to be told that in the letter, "Please be advised that the exemption scheme has now ended." Now, Hackney needs the voluntary sector to support the council's strategies, and we need to work together if the predicted increase in deprivation as new increases in COVID instances hit the population. So my ask of you, Mr. Mayor, and of you as a cabinet, is to help us, to help you, and reinstate the exemption list so that we can do our job without the fear and stress of having to finance our voluntary activities out of our diminishing and ever emptying pockets. So thank you for my opportunity to speak. As I say, my real question is, will you, I don't know why the exemption list has been rescinded, but would you consider, and I ask you to consider, that this scheme is reinstated to enable us to efficiently deliver the services that help the residents of Hackney? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson, and welcome back. I thought you had been before, but I couldn't confirm that in my own mind before introducing to you. So that was very helpful. And I do recall your contribution before. I also take the opportunity to thank Children with Voices and others that have been doing that humanitarian response and how important it has been. I know that we waived over, I think, 6,000 permits at the peak around key workers, and those not just traditionally defined key workers, but also many others that were supporting the borough's efforts at that time. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Burke to introduce the report and perhaps provide a direct answer to some of those questions, and then I may well come back in at the end if there's anything else that needs to be covered off. But obviously take on board what you have said, and I know that Councillor Burke and I and officers have been working very hard around areas such as Graham Road to improve the situation in terms of traffic flows. But Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may, Chair, I'll respond to the question first before I move in the agenda item, if that's okay.
Absolutely, however you wish to do it, Councillor Burke. Okay,
I'll try to be brief, and I won't address at this point, Mr. Watson. Firstly, thank you for your contribution. I won't address at this point the substantive point about low traffic neighbourhoods, because I'll touch on them in a moment in introducing this paper. But as regards the question of volunteers and the exemption list, I'd just like to note that Hackney was the first local authority in the country to deliver an exemption list for key workers long before the government encouraged local authorities to do so. Notwithstanding that did lead to a very significant increase in the number of cars driving into the borough, and over time, as the government has deprioritised some of those key worker roles, we've sought to roll back those exemptions, though some still remain at the moment for clinicians, etc. I have this week spoken to the head of service of parking services about the specific point that you make regarding volunteers, and being informed that if volunteers are demonstrably unloading or seen to be unloading their vehicle for the delivery of these items, then our wardens would not ticket somebody under those circumstances. Now, that may be a matter for debate and probably not something that we're going to resolve here this evening, but I'd like to invite you to speak to the head of service with myself to discuss how we might iron out any problems associated with the problems to which you refer. As you might understand, clearly we're averse to the idea of a very large number of exemptions going to people who may, for a small proportion of their time, volunteer, but then use those exemptions for the purposes of parking wherever they wish within controlled parking zones, and clearly that would be a suboptimal outcome. Nevertheless, I think that there may be a solution to this issue, and I'd like to offer you the opportunity to have that conversation between myself and the head of service to see whether or not we can make any further headway in that respect.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. I think at this stage, given that was a substantive point that Mr. Watson raised, and that the wider impact of LTNs will be covered in the report, I think that was quite a substantial answer and offer to Mr. Watson, and I guess anyone else within that network of volunteers, because I know you're speaking on behalf of Children with Voices, but obviously Councillor Kennedy and Selman and Maxwell are part of our humanitarian response group, and clearly also, if we move to further stages of lockdown, that humanitarian response that was so important to Hackney residents will increase, and we do need to ensure that is supported in all the ways that we can. But I'll hand over back to Councillor Burke to introduce the main report.
Thank you, Chair. I've talked a great deal recently about low traffic neighbourhoods, and I think that the comprehensive report in the agenda papers this evening is a testament to the amount of work that our officers, myself, yourself, and others have put into this emergency transport plan. So I intend to be brief, but inevitably there are a large number of things to cover. So I'll be as brief as I can be, if that will suffice. The emergency transport plan, Chair, is necessary for reasons of past, present, and future, all of which present kind of grave crises to this borough. I'd like to take those challenges in turn. Firstly, I'd like to emphasise that an emergency transport plan is necessary in Hackney, not merely because of the emergency of coronavirus, which is a crisis of the present, but because of our crises of the past, which are the decades in which motor vehicles have been allowed to proliferate in the United Kingdom, with very deleterious effects on the public health and road safety of the people of Hackney. In fact, the number of vehicles on our roads has almost doubled to 40 million in less than 30 years. And I do not believe that fact is unrelated to the issues that we face around air quality and road safety in this borough. And we have the unenviable, I believe, we have the unenviable position of having the 6th highest mortality rate from pollution of 418 local authorities, and one of the highest pedestrian and casualty rates in London. They are ongoing crises that have afflicted this borough for decades and precede these latest low traffic neighbourhoods and other interventions, such as the country's largest number of school streets significantly. Whatever one feels about low traffic neighbourhoods and the interventions we're undertaking, it is an undeniable fact that the London Borough of Hackney was afflicted with major problems associated with the operation of motor vehicles long before we took the radical action that we intend to take to address these problems. This emergency transport plan, Chair, is also necessary for addressing a crisis of the present, which is the coronavirus crisis. Now, not everybody has understood when we have talked about the necessity of having an emergency transport plan to address COVID-19 and its after effects, that when we are talking about doing so, we're not specifically referring to the issue of reducing coronavirus transmission, though clearly that is a priority for us. So making more space for individuals to operate in the public realm is an absolute necessity to enable us to achieve that. But it's primarily about ensuring that Hackney avoids the effects of a post-COVID car-led recovery. Now, we are already beginning to see, Chair, in the outer London boroughs, an extremely significant and worrying increase in the number of motor vehicles on our roads, despite the absence, Chair, of low traffic neighbourhoods. In fact, towards the beginning of September, outer London boroughs were recording an increase year on year of motor vehicle usage and presence on their roads of something in the region of 153%, demonstrating clearly that you don't need low traffic neighbourhoods to contribute to congestion. If the roads are there and available for cars to use, and people are minded to use their cars rather than public transport, to walk or to cycle, then inevitably congestion will never be far behind. And it's absolutely imperative, given our long-standing issues of poor air quality and of poor road safety, that we ensure that the recovery in Hackney at least is not a car-led one for the benefit of the people of our borough. This also comes off the back of data that we're aware of around tyre wear, brake wear, particulate matter from road wear, that demonstrates clearly that low traffic in neighbourhoods are not only necessary to discourage through traffic in the borough, of which something in the region of 50% at any one time are just cars passing through without stopping, but that the switch to electric vehicles, whilst both inevitable and desirable, cannot solve the problems associated with motor vehicle usage alone. It cannot solve the problem of congestion. It cannot solve the problem of particulate matter, more than half of which is not coming from the tailpipe, but from the operation of the car in other ways. And it cannot solve the road safety issue. We need low traffic neighbourhoods to ensure that we rebalance the space between different road users. And I want to emphasise that that is absolutely consistent with the commitments that we made on page 30 of the 2018 manifesto upon which we were elected, and it's consistent with the movement hierarchy of the democratically approved London Borough of Hackney Transport Plan, which places pedestrians, cyclists and public transport users at the very top of its movement hierarchy. And this emergency transport plan, Chair, is also necessary for the crises of the future, the coming crises that we're beginning to see already emerge, the crisis of global warming, which will, I'm afraid, make the coronavirus crisis look like little more than a footnote in history. We cannot insulate ourselves either from the effects of the coming global warming crisis, which are the product of primarily greenhouse gas emissions arising from the operation of industrial societies, such as the one in which we live. Not only can we not insulate ourselves from the coming effects of global warming, but we are direct contributors to those effects too. And to that end, Hackney Council, full council, overwhelmingly voted just last year for a climate emergency motion that committed our administration and our local authority to a decarbonisation commitment consistent with the higher confidence threshold, the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's decarbonisation targets. That is, we committed to halve our borough's carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 and to reach net zero emissions by 2040 across our full range of functions, one of which, of course, is management of the local road transport network. So this emergency transport plan is necessary for the wide variety of pressing reasons which I have outlined. And to that end, I'd like to point people to a kind of succinct summary of what the emergency transport plan will seek to deliver in the coming months and years. On page 101 of the papers, agenda item 1.7 of this paper, we note that the emergency transport plan outlines the creation of an entirely new network of livable low traffic neighbourhoods right across the borough through the reallocation of road space, again consistent with the manifesto upon which we were elected. New permeable filters that eliminate through traffic and rat runs while maintaining full access to residential areas for motor vehicle drivers. Further investment in green infrastructure and tree planting. New bus prioritisation, which is essential in a borough where the bus is amongst the most important modes of transport. And a full review of bus lane hours of operation and the provision of new cycle parking. The emergency transport plan also details plans for the fast tracking of 2 new cycle routes at Green Lanes and Queensbridge Road. It brings forward elements of the Cycle Future Route 3 between Dalston and Clapton. Despite suspension of CFR programme by TfL, we intend to proceed with that in any case. And finally, this plan provides further details on plans to rapidly deliver school streets to 39 primary schools in Hackney. In addition to the 8 school streets we already had, that will ensure that Hackney has overwhelmingly the largest number of school streets in the country, prioritising once again the needs and the health needs in particular and road safety needs of some of our most vulnerable residents, the school children of this borough. I think I've emphasised the ways in which we intend to deliver the emergency transport plan, Chair, and the reasons for which we are doing so. Given the topical nature of the emergency transport plan and in particular low traffic neighbourhoods, There are a number of things, however, I would just like to emphasise in closing the delivery of this paper, which is that far from being high-handed and undemocratic, the delivery of low-traffic neighbourhoods in this emergency transport plan is completely consistent with the manifesto upon which we were elected and the full council-approved London Borough of Hackney Transport Strategy 2021 to 2025. In addition to that, we are also, alongside the delivery of the experimental traffic orders under which our low traffic neighbourhoods being delivered, operating a consultations exercise and through the Commonplace platform to allow people to feed in their views and experiences of how our low traffic neighbourhoods work. I have emphasised the multiple crises that the emergency transport plan is seeking to resolve. Amongst some of the opponents of low traffic neighbourhoods, I've received correspondence from people stating that they absolutely agree with the objectives that we are trying to achieve as a council, but do not necessarily agree with all of the methods that we are employing. I would like to reassure the people of Hackney in regards to the interventions that we've undertaken thus far. We continue to listen as a council, to learn as a council, and if necessary, to make changes, as we've done in the case of Hoxton West. But it is clear, Chair, that we face grave crises relating to the operation of the motor vehicle in Hackney and beyond. And I would say to people, if not now, then when? And if not this, then what? Because something needs to be done. And it's not the opponents of low traffic neighbourhoods who've had to stand in full council when the parents of children who live on polluted roads or dangerous roads have come to us and said, the buck stops with you, Mr. Mayor, the buck stops with you, Councillor Burke. What are you going to do to improve air quality? What are you going to do to improve road safety in this borough? And I believe it would be remiss of us. Now, it would be a derogation of our duty as councillors to have spent the last 4 years having done nothing and then come back to the people of Hackney in 2022 and said this was just too hard, it took too much effort, there was too much opposition from minority groups and business interest groups to the changes that we know are necessary. I don't believe that's good enough for the people of Hackney, and I believe this administration has the will and the desire to make the changes that are necessary to bring about positive change in the borough.
Thank you, Councillor Burke, for your very detailed and very spirited introduction to the report, and I think setting out very clearly, as you have done before, the rationale for what we are doing and seeking to achieve. And I think the only two things I would add, as I've always added, we're all multimodal transport users. We're not anti any particular mode of transport for the sake of it. But we recognise that we put people first, our communities first, and children and young people first, and those most vulnerable road users. And I've also, I think you've made it also very clear that we're listening. We're really keen to hear the feedback from local residents, businesses, and other road users about how we can improve these schemes and adjust these schemes over time. And that is the spirit at which not only Commonplace is there, but obviously the wider engagement that we're embarked on. So thank you indeed. Are there any other questions and comments that Cabinet colleagues would like to make, or happy to agree the detailed recommendations? Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. I just wanted very briefly, as the Cabinet Member for Health, to absolutely 100% support and thank Councillor Burke for this paper and for these measures that are being brought forward. I have absolutely no doubt, as the Cabinet Member with responsibility for the health of our citizens, that these measures are going to improve both the physical health and the mental health of our residents, especially our most deprived residents, those who don't own motor vehicles and will benefit from the active school travel that is encouraged by school streets, and by being able to walk out and down their streets and across their parks much more easily and free from the cars that have encumbered them. I see it myself on my way home. I now enjoy actually going down Richmond Road and seeing more people out on the streets in the last 3-4 weeks than I have ever seen on the streets there, enjoying the benefits of the measures that we're putting in. So hearty thanks to Councillor Burke. I know it has been a hard job, and he's received a lot of criticism. He's borne it very well. It's unjustified, and he's doing absolutely the right thing for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kennedy. And I think it's worth remembering that nearly all of the acute hospital trusts in London wrote to their respective boroughs asking us to, for the reasons that you state, and also to ensure better, more sustainable transport access for their workforce, these changes. And the CEO of the Homerton was no exception, but also the CEO of Barts and our wider health system. So I think it's really important. And we did have a debate with the head of service at the Health and Wellbeing Board about the importance of seeing the impact of health and wellbeing in all of the policies and strategies of the council, including our transport strategy. Deputy Mayor Bramble, I think you indicated.
I did, Mayor Glanville. I just wanted to quickly say, just to thank you firstly for coming along and speaking this evening. And Mayor Glanville, I've heard from different residents. I've heard from residents that have had concerns, and officers, we've spoken to them and met with them when businesses raised issues, and that was rectified very swiftly. I've heard from residents that are very supportive of this, and I've heard from residents, Mayor Glanville, you'll be surprised, that don't think we've been ambitious enough. What I would say is that we will continue to listen to all those voices to ensure that we continue to have a livable neighbourhood that works for everyone. But we as a council are committed to ensure that we have an environment that works for all of our residents, and we'll continue to listen to all of those voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. Are we happy to agree the recommendations? I can't see anyone else indicating. I've got my grid view open. Councillor Williams?
No, just saying agreed. That was all.
Agreed. Agreed.
I didn't want to be slowest on this time.
Thank you. And can I thank all the officers, and especially Councillor Burke, for the work they continue to do. This is definitely one of those examples where you have a strategic document that requires day in, day out hard work and engagement, and that is what we have from the team involved and Councillor Burke. So thank you for all of them that have brought this paper here this evening, and also residents who engaged with that process, both pro and anti, but also those that simply want to feedback and make these schemes better, and also Mr Watson for appearing twice at Cabinet. Are we happy to agree the report?
Agreed.
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 Thank you all. We move on, returning to reports in my name. We've got the land appropriation for phase 3 of Woodbury Down. Cabinet colleagues will know that a critical part of delivering regeneration is land appropriation stage of the process. The next phase has now been to planning committee twice over the last 6 months. It's been subject to further engagement with local residents and ward councillors, and also I'm really pleased to say that at the AGM of Woodco, which is the resident representation organisation that has stood with us and shaped the regeneration at Woodbury Down, that it received, phase 3 received their endorsement prior to it coming back to planning earlier this month. But the report just ensures that we can continue that delivery of phase 3, and ultimately, as the report talks about, we're seeing, because of that work and the changes proposed between the previous phase 3 and this phase 3, an increase in the amount of genuinely affordable homes, but also a substantial improvement in the green infrastructure that is part of this. And I thank all of my colleagues and local residents that have helped shape that and get and especially the work of Woodco and their design committee and getting to this stage. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Councillor Selman.
just very briefly to welcome the report as sort of the next step in progressing us, making sure that we're progressing phase 3. And as you noted before, it being something which I know is incredibly welcomed by residents, reflected at the most recent Woodco board, that we're getting on and building much needed homes on the estate.
Thank you, Councillor Salmon. We're happy to agree the recommendations.
Agreed.
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 Thank you. This next report, in my name again, item 12 is the land at Bowes Field. This has a very interesting and long history, but for Hoxton West colleagues, I would draw their attention to the appendix and the name on the original deed from back in the, I think, 80s or early 90s, which was Val Carlo, then Deputy Mayor of the borough, who signed part of the original documentation that led to the original land deal at Bowes Field. But this report brings up to date the opportunity to realise the land value held in what is currently Greenbelt, but may, because of the work of the local council's local plan, cease to be Greenbelt and allow us to realise the value of that site and bring that capital back home for investing here in Hackney. It doesn't prejudice the local democratic decisions of the council there in Epping Forest, but gives us a real opportunity to unlock further investment for Hackney residents back here. And clearly we, with the exception of places like Kench Hill, which are much valued, have shrunk back our footprint from external holdings in this way. But there was some foresight from a notable resident of Hoxton West in the past in a different role. Any questions or comments on the report? I can't see any. Are we happy to agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you all. Bear with me. There are no appointments to school governors, no further appointments to outside bodies, no urgent unrestricted business, and no need to exclude press or public for any part of the reports, apart from I think there are exempt minutes in 18 and 19, but unless colleagues want to debate those, I won't exclude the press or public at this stage and assume we're happy to agree them without debating them. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, all. Thank you for attending the Cabinet meeting. Thank you to those that are watching. We doubled our viewing figures during the course of proceedings, so thank you to those. I appreciate some of the items this evening continue to be subject to a great deal of public debate, and would encourage residents to continue to engage with that process and re-emphasise, of course, that we are listening to their concerns in real time, and look forward to seeing us next at October full council and Cabinet in October. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.